everyone, it's time for one more steam train video for 2019. One question I get a lot is, can I talk more about some of the different steam locomotives in my videos? Since this is the last steam video of the year, I thought it would be neat to do something a little different and go through all the locomotives I saw running this year and give you a brief history of each one. I saw 17 different steam locomotives running in 2019, most of which I had never seen operational before, so we have a lot to get to. Let's dive right in. The first steam locomotive I saw in 2019 was the Pere Marquette Railway number 1225. This is a big 284 Berkshire type locomotive that ran all over the upper Midwest from the time it was built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1941 until it was retired just 10 years later in 1951. 1225 was donated to Michigan State University in 1955 and placed on display. It was restored to operating condition in 1985 and since then has had a successful second career pulling mainline excursions. Today it is stored and operated out of Owasso, Michigan by the Steam Railroading Institute. An interesting fact about the 1225 is that it was actually the basis for the train seen in the book The Polar Express by Chris Van Allsburg and later in the CGI movie of the same title. After visiting the 1225 in Owasso, I traveled to Flint, Michigan to see two steam locomotives operating on a short tourist line known as the Huckleberry Railroad. The first locomotive, Denver and Rio Grande number 464, was built in 1903 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works as a 282 wheel arrangement K27 class Mikado locomotive. It pulled freight and passenger trains over the rails of the Rio Grande narrow gauge system, finishing off in the early 1960s as the Durango, Colorado yard switcher. It was retired and sold to Knott's Berry Farm Theme Park in Buena Park, California, where it was supposed to pull trains around the park. That is, until it was discovered that the locomotive did not like to turn too well around the tight curves on the Knott's Berry Farm track. It was sold to the Huckleberry Railroad in 1981 and returned to operation in 1989. The other locomotive at the Huckleberry Railroad is Alaska Railroad number 152. This is a 460 type narrow gauge locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1920. The locomotive was used on a number of different railroads in Alaska before being retired following World War II and moved to Washington State for sale. 152 eventually ended up at the Huckleberry Railroad in 1974 and was restored to operation 2 years later. Next, I visited the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad in Garibaldi, Oregon, where I saw 3 different logging locomotives. Polson Logging Company No. 2 was built in 1912 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works with a 282 wheel arrangement. Originally, it operated for Saginaw Timber in Washington State, pulling lumber trains. It would go on to serve several different logging railroads in the Pacific Northwest. In 1980, it was donated to the Illinois Railroad Museum and then sold into private ownership in 1982. Today, this locomotive is stored at the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad and used for special events. McCloud Railway number 25 spent most of its life in the shadows of Mount Shasta in Northern California, operating on first the McCloud River Railroad and later the McCloud Railroad. Built by the American Locomotive Company in 1925 as a 262 Prairie type, it ran primarily in freight service until it was retired in 1955. In 1962, it was brought back to life for a long tourist and movie career, including a brief appearance in the film Stand By Me. When the McCloud Railroad shut its doors for good in 2008, the 25 was sold to the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad for tourist excursion service. The third and final locomotive I saw at the Oregon Coast Scenic was the Columbia River Beltline No. 7, nicknamed the Skookum. The Skookum is a very unique 2442 type articulated locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1909, designed to traverse the tight curves of many logging railroads. It spent most of its working career in the Pacific Northwest pulling log trains for 2 different railroads. In 1955, the locomotive was involved in a serious derailment leading to its retirement. A year later, the Skookum was dragged out of the forest by a railroad enthusiast hoping to restore it to operation. Skookum changed ownership several times before finally arriving at the Oregon Coast Scenic in 2005 and undergoing a lengthy restoration that lasted until late 2018. It is now located in California under private ownership. Next, I was off to Durango, Colorado to see Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge number 18. This locomotive operated on the Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge system out of Awenio, California. It was built in 1911 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works with a 460 wheel arrangement for the Nevada, California, Oregon Railway, sold to the Southern Pacific in 1926, and retired from service in 1955, at which time it was donated to the town of Independence, California. Restored to operation in 2017 by the Carson and Colorado Railway Group, the number 18 was in Durango for oil fire testing in preparation for the Durango and Silverton's conversion of some of their locomotives from coal to oil for fuel. With Durango done, it was off to Texas for a visit to the Texas State Railroad. Tremont and Gulf Railway No. 30, a 282 Mikado, was built in 1917 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, operating over a short 50-mile-long railroad out of Tremont, Louisiana. It was later sold to the Magma, Arizona Railroad and given the number 7, operating there for another decade and a half. In 1974, it was sold to the Texas State Railroad and restored as their number 400. More recently, the locomotive has been returned to the number 30 and lettered once again for the Tremont and Gulf Railroad. The next locomotive was by far the most anticipated of the year, the Union Pacific 4014 Big Boy. As I mentioned in my 2 videos I did this last year about the locomotive, the 4014 is the largest steam locomotive operating in the world. It was built in 1941 by the American Locomotive Company, also known as ALCO, to pull long freight trains over the mountains of Utah and Wyoming. This 4884 wheel arrangement locomotive was among the largest ever constructed in the world. It was retired in 1959 and donated to the Rail Giants Train Museum in 1961, where it was displayed for over 50 years. In 2013, it was reacquired by the Union Pacific to join their heritage fleet of locomotives. Restoration on the Big Boy finished in the spring of 2019, just in time to pull a special excursion from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Ogden, Utah for the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Along with the Big Boy on this excursion was the Union Pacific 844, a 484 Northern type. It was built in 1944 by ALCO and was the last new steam locomotive purchased by the Union Pacific Railroad. It was used in both passenger and freight service until the end of steam on the Union Pacific in the late 1950s. However, unlike other steam locomotives, the 844 has the distinction of being the only steam locomotive to never be retired from service by a major freight railroad. Instead, 844 became part of the Union Pacific's Heritage Fleet program and has been traveling around the Union Pacific system as a public relations tool ever since. Also as part of the 150 Transcontinental Railroad celebration, the Union Pacific 119 and Central Pacific 60 were fired up for display at the Golden Spike National Historic Park. These are both replicas of the original locomotives at the completion ceremony. They were built in 1979 by O'Connor Engineering Laboratories in Costa Mesa, California for the National Park Service. In the fall, I traveled to the Strasburg Railroad in Pennsylvania for the Norfolk and Western Steam Locomotive Reunion. The starring attraction, Norfolk and Western No. 611, was built by the Norfolk and Western Railroad in 1950 as a Class J 484 locomotive in their shops in Roanoke, Virginia. The 611, a streamlined passenger locomotive, pulled trains over the N&W until retirement in 1959. It was moved to the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke until 1982, when it was brought out of retirement by the newly formed Norfolk Southern Railroad for their original steam program. When the program was discontinued in 1994, the 611 was returned to the museum, where it spent the next 20 years until once again being restored for excursion service in 2015. The Norfolk and Western 475 is currently owned and operated by the Strasburg Railroad. It was built by Baldwin in 1906 with a 480 wheel arrangement. 475 spent most of its time on the Norfolk and Western pulling freight trains, finally retired in 1956. After nearly being scrapped in Roanoke, Virginia, it was saved and stored in various places, including at the Illinois Railroad Museum, before finally being purchased by the Strasburg Railroad in 1991 and returning to operation in 1993. While I was at the Strasburg Railroad, I also saw Great Western 90 pulling some of their regular trains. 90 was built by Baldwin in 1924 with a 210 wheel arrangement. It pulled freight trains on the Great Western Railroad in eastern Colorado until purchased by the Strasburg Railroad in 1969. Today, the 90 rolls through the farmland of Pennsylvania Dutch country, pulling thousands of visitors each year. My last steam trip of the year was to the Cass Scenic Railroad in Cass, West Virginia. I saw several operable steam locomotives there, but I will focus on the two that I actually saw pulling trains. The star of the show was Cass 3-truck Climax locomotive number 9, formerly Moore & Keppel Company number 6. Built in 1919, the number 9 spent its entire life in West Virginia, first pulling trains of lumber and later coal. The locomotive was retired in 1960 and sold to the state of West Virginia, arriving at the Cass Scenic Railroad in 1970. In the early 2000s, a full restoration began on the locomotive. Many parts needed to be completely replaced, returning the locomotive to a near-new condition. Restoration was completed in the fall of 2019 after a near 20-year effort. Cass renumbered the locomotive from 6 to 9 since they already have a locomotive in service with the number 6. The last steam locomotive I saw in 2019 was Cass Scenic Railroad number 5. This is the oldest operational Shay locomotive in the world, built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1905 to a 3-truck design. 5 is also the state locomotive of West Virginia. The 5 was built for the Greenbrier and Elk River Railroad, the original operator of the logging railroad located at Cass, West Virginia. When the state of West Virginia took over Cass as a tourist railroad and state historic park, the number 5 continued on in tourist excursion service, pulling and pushing visitors through the same mountains where it had been working since the beginning of the 20th century. Well, that's it. We are done. 17 locomotives, 10 of which I had never seen before under steam. What a year. Well, thanks for joining me for this look back at a year full of steam. If you want to see me do more videos like this in the future, please let me know in the comments section below, and hit that like button too. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so that YouTube will, at least in theory, notify you every time I upload a new video. I have posted videos of 1225, Skookum, and the Big Boy this year, so if you haven't seen those, be sure to take a look at those as well. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.